Welcome to the Reed House Hotel. Probably the most prestigious hotel in Chattanooga, if I do say so myself. Indisputably the oldest. The original Reed House first opened its doors here January 1st of 1872. The building we're standing in today was built on the foundations of that one. This building first took in guests in 1926. That is 98 years of history, if you're only counting this one building. Put it both together, though, and we've been here for 152 years now without closing once. We have stayed open through floods, fires, wars, depressions, COVID. Nothing closed us down. We are the oldest continuously open hotel in the entire Southeast. Now, there's an old saying, though, that given a long enough timeline, everybody's life expectancy drops to zero. And given a timeline of 152 years, with thousands of people checking in and out every year, it is inevitable. Some people will be here on premises when they pass away. And occasionally that passing will not be pleasant. Going to give you an example now. You see, before the Reed House was here, there was another hotel on this same property, Crutchfield House. That was owned by one of Chattanooga's first mayors, Thomas Crutchfield, and was opened between 1847 and 1867 when it burned down. It was here right in the thick of the American Civil War. As a matter of fact, immediately after the Battle of Chattanooga, September of 1863, the Union Army commandeered Crutchfield House as soon as they captured the city. They converted it into a field hospital and treated something like 500 battle casualties here in one day. See, folks, AnnaLisa is not the only ghost walking our halls at night. She's simply the most famous one. So here we are to visit her room, room 311. Still the same door as was here on the night of her murder, or so I've been told. Last hotel room in the building with an old-fashioned mechanical lock. So, step right in, folks. Step back into the 20th century.
Thank God the lights are on.
Room 311.
Yes.
Are you staying?
We're no. Oh, you can feel it. I think I just walked through her.
Back in 2018, they spent close to $30 million all put together. A significant amount of that money was spent restoring 311 to its 1920s glory. The thing here is an authentic 1920s period antique. The standing ashtray here, for example, definite 20th century art. Twin helicopter propeller style blades, as opposed to the four-blade model you see on modern fans, but as you can tell, it still pumps up a very nice breeze. And as you can, folks, never seen anything quite like this anywhere else, and it has all the trimmings too. Brass fittings, ivory mouth and earpieces, marble writing desk for taking notes while you're on the phone. Naturally, you have the old school rotary dial, and the little switch here beside the dial. This is special. Flip the switch, lift the receiver, and you're automatically patched in. Within 5 minutes, either housekeeping or the engineering department, our maintenance crew, would be knocking on the door. Finally, before we leave this room, I want to point out the artwork on the wall, an architect's draft from 1924. Basically, this is concept art, showing what this hotel would look like when it was completed in 1926. As you can see, very little has changed between. And here we are, the bedroom part of the suite. Not that plush by modern standards, I'll grant you that, but very classy. Out now, bring it to everyone's attention because it's one of those things that once a guest notice it, it's pretty much all they can focus on. That is the artwork over the bed here. This is actually the newest thing in the room. We go from our sister hotel out of Charleston, the Vendue. Now the Vendue has an art gallery attached to it, and they actually have this piece designed and commissioned especially for room 311, just to lend a bit of atmosphere to the place, which it does a pretty good job of, actually. All right, next things immediately. The first being, good God, that has to be the most depressing view from a hotel window I've seen in my life. And the second thing, of course, being the bars and the windows here, which struck me as a really odd thing for a hotel room to have when I first started work here. So I asked our hotel, okay, what's up with the bars in 311? Well, according to Mr. Logue, the bars were installed for the benefit of this gentleman whose picture we have on the wall here. You're all far too young to remember him from real life, but if you're a fan of gangster movies, you're at least familiar with the name. And I heard somebody say it. Here we are, of course, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Al Capone, king of Chicago's organized crime syndicates, the original Scarface, probably the most notorious gangster in 20th century American history. Although you will note, if you look closely at his police rap sheet here, he listed his occupation as gambler. Well, the gambler's luck ran out in 1931. He was on his way down from Chicago. He had just been sentenced there in federal court for even murder, but for income tax evasion, the one charge they were ever able to successfully pin on him. And he was on his way from the courthouse in Chicago down to the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. Yeah, now he would later be transferred to Alcatraz Island because, as it turned out, he was getting a little chummy with the staff and management in Atlanta. Word was he pretty much had the run of the prison, was tipping prison guards like they were bellhops. So they just shifted him over to another facility where he didn't have all that influence. But that is a whole nother story. What we're focused on here is how he got to Atlanta in the first place. Because moving a prisoner around the country back in the 1930s was a bit of a challenge, actually. This was 1931. There was no Con Air yet, no air transport service. And the interstate highway system, well, that wouldn't be up and running for another 25 or 30 years. So getting a prisoner to prison back then, it took some time and it took some serious effort. You had to load them in a car with a couple of guards. You had to trip. And with no interstates, that trip could take days. In this case, they got as far as Chattanooga and they pulled into the Reed House for the evening. Now, I've been told that the standard procedure for these prisoner transports, once they reach a hotel at night, well, normally they would just take the prisoner down cellar, find a secure room in the basement with a good sturdy lock on the door, usually the pantry, and put the prisoner there for the night. Mr. Capone, though, being a good bit more notorious and considerably wealthier than your average convict, well, he kicked up a fuss. Absolutely not. No way was he spending his last night outside prison, locked in our basement next to the canned corn. Fortunately, as I mentioned, he was extremely wealthy. Wealthy enough, in fact, to be able to afford having bars installed in the windows here on 3 hours' notice. Long story short, folks, Al Capone got to spend one last night in a luxury hotel suite before going into the big lockup. And I have to assume, at least I'd really like to think, that the hotel desk clerk working that day was a bit of a joker. Saw Capone's reservation pop up and was like, "Hey, fellas, check this out. Look who we got spending the night with us tonight. We got Al Capone himself checking in here. Oh, tell you what I just thought of a great idea. We're going to put him up in that room where we had the murder committed a couple of years ago. Make him feel right at home." And that, folks, is where we come to our main story. Thereby of AnnaLisa Netherly. Now, AnnaLisa and her husband checked into the Reed House, room 311, back in the spring of 1927. Small world. They were from Chicago, too. Mr. Netherly was an executive with a construction firm there. He was in town to oversee some projects that had been approved for the Chattanooga area. And he brought his beautiful young bride, AnnaLisa, with him on a working vacation. Yeah, they only planned to be here a week. Maybe 10 days, tops. Unfortunately, things did not quite work out that way. It seems that every project Mr. Netherly was involved in went completely off the rails for one reason or another. There were equipment malfunctions, there were weather delays, property line disputes, supply issues. Well, it was Murphy's Law in action. Anything that could go wrong went wrong big time. So those 10 days they planned on spending here, that stretched into 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and then a full month. Now, after the first couple, he is forced to start making trips back to Chicago to try to pacify the board of directors at his firm. His bosses are not happy with his lack of progress here. They want answers. They want them straight from his mouth. "No telegrams will be accepted. Thank you very much, sir." Well, it was decided it would be too expensive to have both Netherlys commuting back and forth constantly, to say nothing of the wear and tear, physically and emotionally. So, in what turned out to be a horrifically bad idea, Mr. Netherly leaves AnnaLisa here in 311. He gives her a small allowance and standing orders to stay put, be a good girl, hold down the fort, and stay out of trouble.